This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of May 26, 2025. Alongside my tag team partner, Matt Moscardi, I'm Damian Rollis, and today's countdown, a woke power shift at Decker's Outdoors. Ball CFO Hoawrd keeps the money. A full activist investor takeover at Pitney Bowes. Non-human primates are more popular than human mothers. Yikes. And on the big vote, Matt is binge voting Netflix. Let's start with our top stories. Sabre, help me with this one. CBRE Group? What is that
CBRE,
one? Yeah. CBRE Groups. Sorry, CBRE Group. I'm so embarrassed for you. The COO, Vikram Kohli, received a one-time cash retention bonus of $1.45 million for not quitting. It's a good deal. If the company terminates Mr. Kohli without cause or resigns for good reason, basically if he leaves the company, there is no obligation to repay the retention bonus. You don't see that one very often. I like that one.
It's a nice perk.
Ball Corporation announced that CFO Hoawrd is stepping down after less than 2 years at the job. Hoawrd will receive full severance benefits, consistent with the company's severance policy, about $2.2 million. Also, his outstanding time-based new hire equity award will continue to vest. His performance-based restricted stock units and long-term cash awards granted in 2024 will continue to vest on a time prorated basis and subject to performance to ensure a seamless transition given his contributions during the performance period. And finally, the company said that it, quote, appreciates Mr. Yu's contributions during his tenure and wishes him the best in his future endeavors, and that the departure is not related to any disagreement with the company or any matter related to its accounting practices, financial statements, internal controls, or operations. So there you go.
When they say the performance period, they do know that was less than 2 years of performing, right?
Which they appreciate.
They did appreciate his contributions in his 17 minutes of being CFO.
I'm sorry, there's no way shareholders cannot ratify crap like this. The down to 2 women on the board trend continues. Nancy Tellem stepping down at Rocket Companies. I've been tracking all companies that are now falling below the threshold of having 3 women on the board. And what appears to be happening is that a woman retires and they don't replace her. On the other hand, there's a woke power shift at Decker's Outdoor, where Cindy Davis takes over as board chair for Mike Devine III. As the company itself already points out in its proxy statement, 2 of 3 committees are chaired by women, and the third is chaired by a person of color, Juan Figueroa. The proxy also states that the board is, quote, 45% ethnically diverse and 55% from underrepresented communities. All of this is just to point out that ditching DEI because of a hateful, bloated president is not, in fact, a listing requirement. You can still still operate as usual. I know it's incredible.
I thought NASDAQ made that a prerequisite. No, I guess not.
And finally, on May 21st, this was a weird one. On May 21st, about a month after its 2025 proxy statement was released, Thermo Fisher Scientific announced a $60 million retention equity award for CEO Mark Casper to secure his continued leadership through at least May 2030. Now, that award was not even hinted at in the proxy statement a month ago. On that same day, I'm guessing mere minutes after that filing occurred, although I don't even know, do shareholders see these filings before they vote? Shareholders resoundingly rejected Thermo Fisher's say-on-pay proposal. 65% said no. That's one of the highest totals I've ever seen. I don't understand the timing of this. I find it hard to believe that they're all sitting around on their phones reading 8Ks. I don't know. Maybe they announced it before the vote. I'm really unclear about this one. It's really strange. But I applaud investors at Thermo Fisher Scientific for noticing an abhorrent addition to the pay policy. But unfortunately, I should add that the shareholders did not punish the people who came up with this secret award. Pay committee chair Dion Weissler only had 13% no vote, and the rest of the committee about 3 or 4% against. So they didn't really care about the committee at all.
So what you're saying is that we want to retain a CEO until 2030. We can't hit a target that's like by 2030. I mean, companies are rescinding their carbon targets that they set for 2030 and 2040 because it's just too hard. It's too far away. But we know that this CEO is going to be good through 2030, and investors don't think so. Investors don't.
And we're so confident about it that we're actually gonna withhold that from the proxy statement.
Yeah, we'll sneak it by after the AG, like the minute the AGM's over.
Let's move over to our proxy cage matches. We have 3 stories we're covering. First, at Pitney Bowes. Pitney Bowes has appointed its own activist investor and Pitney Bowes director Kurt Wolf as its new CEO. Wolf is the chief investment officer of Hestia Capital Management, a hedge fund that owns approximately 9% of Pitney Bowes and has been reshaping the company's board since 2023. This one is, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, if you can think off the top of your head. Usually we see activist investors putting their own people on the board. You don't usually see those board members elevated to CEO. It's a complete takeover, no?
The only one I can think of is Norfolk Southern, where they actually had a CEO and CFO replacement. They wanted the board seats
from the actual activist investor.
Yeah, and Cora wanted the board seats so that they could put in their own CEO and CFO who they were shopping. They basically said, "We want the board seats to put these people in."
No pressure, Kurt Wolf, but you better turn this company around. HG Vora Capital Management, which owns about 5% of Penn Entertainment, has escalated its campaign for boardroom change by accusing CEO Jay Snowden, this is in a filing with the SEC, of using the company's private jet as a, quote, personal Uber service, end quote. HG Vora is seeking to get 3 new directors elected to the board, though Penn has only put up 2 for nomination and says the 3rd seat does not exist. That's the quote. After it shrunk the size of its board from 9 members to 8, which is just, the whole thing is absurd to me. I'm sorry. And once again, it takes an activist investor to point out that, CEOs don't need to be using shareholder cash to fly themselves around the country in private jets.
It's also convenient that the 3rd seat does not exist when an activist is interested, but when they want to add a 3rd seat an extra seat, they just add it.
Yeah,
they
just pull the trigger.
Just pull the trigger.
And finally, how about this one? A red state versus blue state activist investor battle. Rhode Island-based Astronova is embroiled in a proxy cage match with Texas-based activist investor Askeladden Capital Management. Is that supposed to be a fun pun there?
I think it's a pun.
Which owns a 9% stake in the company. Askeladden has nominated 5 bro candidates to replace the majority of Astronova's 6-member board, citing, among other things, governance failures. I love that activist investors are the end of the story experts on all things governance. When they announce governance failures, investors seem to listen.
I wonder what ISS thinks about this.
That's the emoji with the 3 Z's. Let's go over to our vote results table. We are continuing to track the largest companies in our data set. I only look at the 2 largest categories that we cover, essentially equal to the S&P 500. So here are the highlights from 81 large cap annual meetings over the past week. First of all, Matt, the real story every week is the diminishing total of shareholder proposals. So only 55 total proposals from 81 companies. And that actually only occurred at 31 companies because, as far as an example, Amazon had 8 of those shareholder proposals. So really, not only are there fewer proposals, but they're really only happening in a handful of companies.
Not to mention, we should just rename them non-binding requests because they're not actually
advisory proposals. Yes,
and 40% of them at this point, 40 to 50% of them are anti-woke requests. They are removing DEI, or they're from
Right.
the same three anti-woke proponents in the National Legal Center, the National Public Policy Research, whatever, and Boyer Research. That's
Which
basically all
generally
it is.
get about 1 to 2% of support. They're just there for political theater.
It's like it's just a lot of extra reading. Is
Yeah.
all that is, and there's less of them, and there's still a lot.
So I've been continuing to count something which I'm calling the apathetic investor. So I'm looking at companies where there are no shareholder proposals and there's zero shareholder dissent, meaning that no plan, no proposal was above 20%. Directors are all below 20%. There's just nothing going on, and that happened at 47 of 81 companies. So a majority of companies, completely apathetic investor base. Only 6 wins overall. I mentioned Thermo Fisher Scientific with the big say on pay win, 65% rejecting that plan. And then some of the things that we've been seeing, simple majority vote, act by written consent, that kind of thing. Couple of declassification wins, one at Charles Schwab, one at Phillips 66. And really, that's it. I mean, there's 7 moral victories, which I say is over 30% of the vote. But again, just more kind of boring governance stuff. Sorry, John Chevedden. I'm not suggesting what you're putting up is not important, but we're not seeing any wins with anything other than things like simple majority vote, act by written consent, independent board chair. And again, these aren't even wins. These are moral victories. At JP Morgan Chase, 37% actually said yes to an independent board chair proposal, which is pretty incredible considering the non-independent board chair at JP Morgan Chase is one of the more famous CEOs on the globe, Jamie Dimon. So a full 37% of shareholders there are they not suggesting, Matt, that they don't want Jamie to be the chair? That's pretty significant, I would think.
I mean, considering that 24% of the stock is held by basically 4 or 5 companies, right? It's BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity. So, when you look at and they generally just side with management, generally no matter what. If you actually remove them, that's basically more than half of active investors who want an independent board chair.
Of course, there's this ongoing disconnect in general, which always irritates me. As an example, an act by written consent proposal at CDW Corp got 51% of the vote. That's a win. But then at VeriSign, it only got 6%. So there is absolutely no logic to why. You pointed out, rightfully so, Matt, that what you're seeing is a pattern where certain proponents, like the John Cheveddens, the Jim McRitchies, are getting a consistent level of support, where the anti-woke, anti-ESG are also getting consistent level of support, which is very low. But then you just see all these sort of outliers where there's just no consistency company to company. I would love to know the reason for this. I think we'll never find out the reason.
Maybe we should have CDW and VeriSign investors fight each other, like in a parking lot.
Or on our show. One thing I've been tracking too this proxy season is the shareholder disconnects. One of the biggest I've seen so far this season is the one at Thermo Fisher Scientific, which I already pointed out. Shareholders supported directors to a tune of an average of 96% support, and yet 65% voted no on say on pay, which is just an outrageous disconnect if you think about it. As far as the directors are concerned, Matt, 81 companies, which is what, roughly at least 800 directors, I'm guessing. Only four out of all of those directors even had higher than a 20% vote against, and nobody was over 30%. So even that is like, that's nothing. That director is obviously not going to leave the board, but more and more shareholders do not care about their directors, despite the Wall Street Journal article basically begging the investor universe that to look at this, and that this is more crucial than ever to understand director performance. The investors don't seem to care. And finally, a few oddities I want to point out before I hand over to Matt, who is watching a lot of Netflix. How about this one? A DraftKings, a board matrix disclosure proposal from the controller of the city of New York. I like that one. Basically, DraftKings tells you nothing about the directors, And this proponent just wants to know who they are, what their skills are, what their, their.
That's an interesting ask,
Yeah.
mostly because no one pays attention to those matrices to begin
Anyway,
with. Right?
yeah.
Like, so you're asking for something that no one actually looks at afterwards.
Yeah. So what I loved about this one is DraftKings basically said, no, we already do this. We already point out existing skills and diversity. So, we don't have to, why would we do this? And here's an example of how they do this. This is the only thing that they said about one director. I don't know her first name, Mosley, but here's what they said about Mosley. This is the only thing they said about her diversity and skill set. We believe Ms. Mosley, I guess the Ms. maybe is a sign that right?
Of nothing, right? Right.
We believe Ms. Mosley is qualified to serve on our board due, among other things, which they're not going to tell us, to her extensive investment experience and background, including her experience serving as a member of the boards and committees of several large U.S. public companies. So her skill set and diversity is that she's already done this job somewhere else, I guess.
It's worse than that in my mind because it basically is like you might as well have written, we believe Ms. Mosley's background qualifies her to be on the board, period. It's the same amount of information that I just got.
And here's an interesting wrinkle to this argument that in its statement against the proposal, DraftKings said that the board themselves, all the directors, act as a collective body. Okay, so they're not actually individuals, Matt. They're kind of like an ant colony. And this says that our disclosures are focused on emphasizing the collective strength of our board, really suggesting, Matt, that they know they have it all figured out. Maybe we shouldn't be voting on directors in the first place, right? Because they act as a collective hive, right?
Oh.
There's no need to really kind of articulate the differences between the directors. It's a collective body.
I'm going to defend DraftKings here. 88% of the influence is the three co-founders, Paul Lieberman, Matthew Kalish, and Jason Robbins, have 88% of board influence. The rest of the board is kind of a hive mind. They don't have opinions. They're just there to support those
they could have said that. They could have said that then. How about this battle? This is I don't know what kind of a battle. This is an ethical, existential crisis. Okay, so we have two shareholder proposals. One from Charles River Laboratories. PETA wants a report on non-human primates. And then at Tenet Healthcare, the New York State Common Retirement Fund wants a report on the strategies and programs for improving maternal health outcomes. Okay? The winner, non-human primates. They get 8% of the vote. The women, the mothers, they only get 5% of the vote. So
we
maternal
need more
health
head-to-heads like that.
I feel like maternal health is a dunk, but isn't it the one thing we can all still support is moms?
Because it applies to 50% of the human population, you mean?
And the ones that are like allowing us to breathe air.
But look, the non-human primate ones does apply to 100% of the primate population. So,
shout out to a friend of the show, James McRitchie. He had my favorite quote of the week by far. It's ServiceNow. He put up a proposal, a right to cure purported nomination defects. That's a kind of an arcane one, but a good one. It only got 3% support from shareholders, but here's what he said in his proposal to support the proposal. He said, when reviewing one corporation's advance notice bylaw, a Delaware judge noted that disclosures required of a nominating stockholder, quote, would choke a horse, end quote. I like that one, Jim. That was a good one. Yeah.
I wonder how horses would fare against maternal health outcomes in a vote.
And finally, I like this one. You don't see this very often. A management proposal. So the board itself put up this proposal. This is not from the shareholder. At Builders First Source, they asked shareholders to vote on a proposal to remove limits on the size of our board of directors. It was rejected. 63% said no. They're not falling for this crap, which again, the disconnect to me is massive. So they don't want you to arbitrarily add members to the board, But when they do, they're not going to vote on whether they're not going to vote no anyway. Like if you nominate someone, fine, we'll vote for you, but we don't want you to add voters without our permission.
Please don't add more than one person for us to not care about.
I don't get it.
That's all it is.
Yeah, I know. All right, that's it. That's all I got, Matt. So let's move over to the big vote where you're talking about Netflix. Let's do it.
Netflix is, one of the big companies up for a vote next week. I want to start with something really simple because when I looked at Netflix, if you look at the performance of the company, it's like a banner, like year, 5 years, 8 year, 10 years. Like Netflix is America. Nobody complains.
It's the
about
world.
Netflix.
It's the globe. Yeah.
There was a brief period where everyone thought, "Oh, Netflix lost 7 subscribers. They must be falling into the ocean." But they're kind of unchallengeable at this point in terms of their behemoth status in media. Really, what stuck out to me was the question of independence at Netflix. On the board of Netflix, and this is a perfect case study for what is independence really. And I started with actually what NASDAQ says independence is. Here's what NASDAQ says. This is a quote. Quote, independent director, they're defining it, means a person other than an executive officer or employee of the company or any other individual having a relationship, which, in the opinion of the company's board of directors, would interfere with the exercise of independent judgment in carrying out the responsibilities of a director.
So the board itself is the one that determines independence?
Isn't that the greatest part of this?
Yeah.
The board, who may not be independent, is the one who says, do you have a relationship with a company that would interfere with you being independent? They're the arbiter.
And notice it's the opinion of the board, too. It's not like it's based on a set of criteria.
That's correct. It's in the opinion of the company's board of directors. They go on to say a director who is or at any time during the past 3 years was employed by the company is not independent. So that one's a hard line.
Okay.
If you were employed by the company
pretty standard.
in the last 3 years.
Yeah, that was one of the great innovations governance data-wise from the corporate library, GMI ratings, MSCI, was that they adopted this category called outside related, right? So they weren't independent, they weren't an executive, but they're connected to management clearly. And one thing that the corporate library threw away was this nonsense that if it was over let's say it's 3.5 years, you worked there 3.5 years ago, you're not suddenly independent, right?
Yeah, now you're independent, right? Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Well, then there's the last sort of major milestone is a director who accepted or who has a family member who accepted any compensation from the company in excess of $120,000 during any period of 12 consecutive months within the 3 years preceding the determination of independence.
Right.
So basically, you can take $119,999 from the company.
I would love to.
And anytime in the last 3 years and still be considered independent.
Yeah.
Right?
That comes from the SEC, I think, or maybe the listing exchange.
That's the listing exchange.
Rule, right?
That's NASDAQ.
Yeah,
that's a NASDAQ rule. A lot of these conform. These are all sort of similar at New York Stock Exchange, and they're similar in the Investment Act of 1940. There's a lot of similarities. They sort of are all conforming. It doesn't include, though, the SEC's sort of redefinition of independence from the Church and Dwight case last year. Now, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, just last year, James Craigie was the CEO of Church and Dwight up until something like 2015, 2016. He stayed on the board afterwards. By 2019, he was considered independent because 3 years had passed.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And he was no longer an employee of the company, despite the fact that he was on the board the entire time. There's no change. Right?
Do you think on that first day after the 3 years, he as a joke, he pretended to forget the names of the directors,
all the executives that he worked with, all the people he hired?
Have I met you before? I don't.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm a new independent director. The board actually affirmatively determined that Craigie was independent and had no material relationship with the company at the time. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. The SEC then determined that Craigie had failed to disclose to the board a close personal friendship with an executive at the company.
Of course.
He was the chair of the board at the time they went on vacation together, right?
I mean, those relationships don't go away after 3 years. It's absurd.
The SEC actually defined it as a social independence from the company. And the board members were not informed of this relationship in making their affirmative determination. Meanwhile, most of the board was on the board at the time he was a chair and not independent and working with that executive, right? So 5 of the 11 board members had been on the board when Craigie was actually the CEO of the company, and then executive chair, and then all of a sudden magically independent. So those 5 board members arguably aren't independent themselves from the CEO, the ex-CEO, right?
Yeah.
So there's this redefinition of what social independence is. So let's get into Free Float's definition and bring it to Netflix, okay? There's very clearly social dependence and social independence.
Right.
And it might actually be measurable. We are looking at the lack of connections between directors or the existence of connections between them through nonprofit boards or other board interlocks. There is demographic independence, the lack of overlapping experiences, like are they all CEOs? Are they all CFOs? Demographic connections, like, you know, are you all the same race or the same gender?
Are you all Red Sox fans?
Did you all grow up in one community? Did you all go to one school or most of you go to one college? Age, are you all 66 years old, right? Like there's a lot of ways to sort of measure independence. And I added this new idea just for this. It's the called joint probability. It actually is a way in statistics, and I'm no statistician, so I could get this wrong. But there's a way in statistics to measure the probability that 2 events happen simultaneously, right?
Okay.
Like if board member A and board member B join this board, what's the probability that could happen? And then add that with every other board member.
Yeah, it'd be for me, it'd be like I went to Oberlin College for my undergraduate degree. It'd be like if I joined the board and there was a fellow Oberlin alum who also had a Red Sox hat on. I mean, what are the chances that I don't end up like sitting by that person and chatting? It's impossible.
Well, given like, it's more like, you know, Jim who knows me. What is the probability that you and I, given our ages, our experiences, our like everything about us, the probability that with that connection in common, we end up knowing each other somehow.
I mean, not to mention that it is human nature to kind of gravitate towards the people that you just feel more comfortable with, especially like when you're new anywhere, right? I mean, you're looking for you want to feel comfortable.
I mean, the chances Jim would have introduced the 2 of us because he would have been like, I know another loser just like you. You guys should talk, right?
Yeah.
Well, now let's look at Netflix. When we look at sort of just our straight up data, 81% of the Netflix board is connected inside of 2 degrees through public and nonprofit boards alone. That's almost every board member. That's what we can see.
Which makes sense to me because Reed Hastings, if a single figure like Reed Hastings had such control over the board for so long, wouldn't most of it be coming from his brain? Like, wouldn't he be using the same algorithm to kind of find new people?
I am not even counting with that number the fact that on this board, fully 4 of the members are or were at Netflix as employees. Okay. Right? Reed Hastings, Leslie Kilgore is considered an independent director, despite the fact that she was an employee under Hastings for 12 years until 2012. Yeah. She joined the board right after retiring as an employee. She waited for 3 years and then was considered independent. Wow. She's now been on the board for 13 years. Yeah. So she has been with Hastings for 25 years.
Yeah.
But she is considered independent on this board.
I was going to say, like, even if you go to like Dunkin' every day or Starbucks every day and you see the same barista, like even that, you're kind of friends with them after a while. I mean,
after
imagine 25 years.
25 years of the same barista. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in this situation, it would be like if I was a barista and I worked with my boss for 12 years.
Yeah.
And then I went to the same coffee shop for the next 13 years.
And just served the boss drinks every day.
I mean, like, you pretend like, oh, I just met you. You're a new person to me.
Wow, that is nuts. That is nuts.
That doesn't even get it.
So
like,
wait, so you're telling me that since it's really up to the board of Netflix itself is suggesting that Leslie Kilgore is not independent.
Leslie Kilgore is
That's
independent
crazy.
using
It's
NASDAQ
crazy.
listing standards. Another independent director is Jay Hoag.
Oh, yeah.
He's actually the lead independent director.
Yeah, he's been there forever.
He's been on this board since Clinton's last year in office,
Oh,
1999.
Wow. Okay.
He was one of the original investors in Netflix.
Wow.
He sits on 3 other boards actively, so he's plenty busy. He's been on the board for 25 years, a quarter century, and he's considered independent, not just independent, lead independent. He's supposed to be the counterbalance and the representative for shareholders against Reed Hastings. He's known Reed Hastings as long as Leslie Kilgore has.
Yeah,
25 years
he's
working
basically
together.
his right-hand man, right? I mean, he's like his Sheryl Sandberg almost on the board.
Richard Barton was also a VC. He joined the board in 2002, one of the early investors. He's 57 years old. He joined the board when he was 34. And Hastings ran the company. Hastings was 41. Hastings might as well have been his dad.
Wow.
I mean, like these are like young people joining the board together. And then you have Ann Mather's been there for 15 years.
Right.
She's a tech board member everywhere. There are the two co-CEOs of Netflix are on this board.
That's right.
Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters. So if you add in Hastings, there are 4 Netflix employees or ex-employees. And then you add in 2 early investors in Hastings on a 13-person board. 6 of the members actually have been together for decades. Decades together.
You know, you're pointing out this unfortunate black hole of governance, which we talk about all the time, is that at these dictatorships, nobody really, people stop paying attention in general. They first of all, they don't pay attention to the dictatorship, which is the most important thing. They don't pay attention to the dual class voting structure, which is also important. But then they don't even pay attention to the board anymore because they're just like, oh, whatever. It's Reed Hastings' world. What are we going to do?
What they're paying attention to is the stock price is going up, and it's very easy to just say, what do I care who's on the board while the stock price goes up?
Okay, but that's not the role of
But
that's not the entire
not the
role,
role.
of ESG analysts, of investors,
That's not your fiduciary duty.
No,
Your
no.
fiduciary duty isn't to, while things are good,
stare
ignore
at
everything.
the share price. Yeah.
It's to protect the gains you've gotten. Your job is to protect your asset. So the fact that every one of when I add those things together, even Strive Misiyiwa, I can't say his name. I'm sorry, Strive.
Yeah.
He's on no other public boards. He's from Africa. I found a connection between him and Hastings through the Gates Foundation where they had overlapping people in common.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Every one of the people on this board is actually connected in some way, even in ways that don't just easily appear on paper.
Well, it's someone that Reed is comfortable with, is what you're saying.
And as of April 17th, Reed Hastings announced the company announced that he's moving to be a non-executive chair of the company, which means in 3 years, he will be considered independent.
Oh, stop.
By listing standards, the listing standards specifically say
I don't believe that one.
Your shareholdings in the company do not disqualify you from being considered independent.
I hope that he stays on the board long enough for us to see that. I would love to see them call him independent.
On April 17th, 2025, that was the first day he's considered
a reminder on your phone.
non-executive director.
Put that on your calendar.
Director. So let's look at the probability that it's random. This is the new thing that I tried out for this, right? According to the stats, using all the data that we have, 77% of Netflix directors have a 0% probability of being added randomly. This is a totally non-random board. They are hand-selected. 0% chance that it's random that they are there. Now, that doesn't mean that it was a guarantee they would be there, but the fact that they got added is a 0% chance that that's random. Like they went through some search process and found 20 candidates and picked the best one.
I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but was Jay Hoag, has he been nomination committee chair for a while too? Or is he currently nomination committee chair?
Yes, he's been for a while.
Okay,
a while.
Okay.
So this is totally non-random. Netflix is in the top 10% of U.S. large cap companies for how non-random the board is.
Okay.
They're one of the worst for the lack of randomness on this board.
Sure.
In fact, the average company in Netflix's sector is 54% random. This is generous. I'm being generous about this, right? Like these are probabilities.
But I'm guessing that the non-randomness skews towards companies that are dictatorships, right? Could that be true?
Well, we're limited to what we can see on paper. So dictatorships, if I can link the people to the dictator,
right.
We included all outside related reasons, like whether or not you are a former employee, whether or not you are an employee representative. We included all connections known between other boards and nonprofits. We included demographic data in the randomness of the selection, like how random is it that you would be there. And when you include all of those things, it is not disparaging against dictatorships any more than any other company. In fact, the worst companies on the list include companies like Target, 92% non-random.
Really?
It is 8% random. There's only one director we couldn't account for.
Well, maybe that's why the board was so ineffective in fighting Brian Cornell's disastrous turn against such things as DEI, which all headlines are suggesting is one of the reasons why the company is struggling.
So if you are an investor, right, here's your action item. A board like this is not about like just strictly looking at the performance of the stock and saying, oh, well, it went up, so I don't care, right? Like this is a banner stock. I don't care. These directors' job is to represent you. What are the chances that a board that 77% of the directors were hand selected? There's a 0% probability that they were randomly selected through a talent search, right? This is not a talent search company. While they may be looking for talent at the employee levels, they are not doing it at the board level. What are the chances that these people represent you and not like the investor and not Reed Hastings, the founder? So here's another quote from NASDAQ. It is important for investors to have confidence that individuals serving as independent directors do not have a relationship with the listed company that would impair their independence. That's NASDAQ's reason for looking at independence. Straight up, you can say this does not meet a basic social independence standards, not probabilistically and not on paper when you look at the connections between the directors, each other, and the company. So what you want to do is it's time to start voting out people who are clearly unrandom and voting in new people. You need to demand of Netflix, engage and demand that they expand their talent pool for board selections because you want to protect the gains that you've gotten and you want to expand on those gains. So it's time to vote out Jay Hoag, the longest tenured director, Barton, second longest tenured. And can we pick one of the co-CEOs to be on the board?
It is strange.
Do we need both?
Yeah.
Can we vote out Peter since Ted Sarandos is supposed to be like the
he's the man. He's the genius.
He's the one, right?
Yeah.
Like that who's been chosen. And especially as the founder begins to exit sort of a day-to-day role in the company, you need to become a mature company in which you can rely on the directors to count on to protect your asset. So I'm saying vote out Hoag, Barton, and pick a co-CEO.
You know,
I'd go with Peters. Vote out Peters.
My feeling too is in cases like this, a lot of investors will scoff and think what we're drumming up here is ludicrous because of the ongoing success of Netflix. Right, as you pointed out, the share price is dominant. Everything is dominant about the company, but I always see these things as like a long-term risk. You're looking at long-term risk, right? Because 4 years from now, when some other streaming behemoth comes along, or just that the media landscape changes in a way that Netflix has not anticipated, because they really haven't innovated much, other than the fact they've been trying to add games, but I don't think that anyone plays games on Netflix. So when there's a major shift in the way that the customers consume media, and everyone's upset that Netflix, what has Netflix done? It's been the same old stale board and the same stale platform forever, that's when they're going to get upset. So to your point, Matt's not suggesting vote out everybody. Just like make sure you keep things fresh. Keep an eye on the rest of the world. Just, we don't need, we already understand what J-Hogue wants. We've understood it for 30 years. It's not going to ruin the brand by by replacing J-Hogue, but you may at least keep your eye on other innovations and not get caught up if something changes, right?
Correct. That's correct. It's about talent,
long-term
right?
risk, talent,
long-term risk.
Exactly, future talent, right?
Yes. We want no more non-performing assets. We want performing assets.
Let's not forget that Reed Hastings not going to be there forever anyway. So
you're going to need a structure to represent you, even as Reed Hastings exits. So those are my recommendations on the board. I have one shareholder proposal that I spent way too much time on.
All right, go ahead. I'll allow you.
I'll
allow you.
So shareholder proposal number 5 is a proposal from Boyer Research on behalf of, this is not a joke, the Oklahoma Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust.
Okay.
That is a trust set up in Oklahoma that was paid into from tobacco companies
Sounds very
to
woke.
Educate and stop cancer related to tobacco use, right? It's pretty woke.
Yeah, and on a tangent that I don't want to go too deep on, if they suggested to do that today in 2025, everyone would scream and call it too woke. And
it's very woke. You could never do that. Like they're actually suggesting doing things like that in Vermont. They're trying to have the oil companies pay into an oil fund for the damage they've done. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know how that's different from paying into a fund for tobacco and the damage they've done. It's effectively the same concept.
Sure.
In this case, Boyer Research is using they're holding in Netflix to file a shareholder proposal on their behalf. Mm-hmm. The ask they have is a report on charitable giving and whether it discriminates against particular viewpoints. This is a common ask.
Meaning conservative viewpoints or religious
actually,
viewpoints.
Specific religious
Christian conservative viewpoints.
Are you allowing or are you donating to religious charities or are you discriminating against them, right? Is effectively what the ask is.
Yeah.
I went through with way too fine a tooth comb. This is this is maybe the 10th or 20th
How does a
version
proposal
of this,
like
right?
this not get excluded anyway in this current
Well,
climate?
It turns out they're actually, every time they don't get excluded, they are writing this up as wins, right? Like that they're victorious at getting through the SEC.
Well, good. Then that means the left part of the ESG movement they have now
They've
thousands
won a lot.
of wins.
They've won a lot of times. But Boyer cites the 2024 edition of the Viewpoint Diversity Score, which is it's run by a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, and it's a score of companies, how they effectively are sort of allowing diverse viewpoints that include conservative and religious thought. Mm-hmm. It is the most ESG score I've ever seen. Okay. It is basically they actually call the things key issues.
Sure.
Without irony, they cover policies at all these companies, and the score covers 85 companies, and they have multiple sort of pillars of viewpoint diversity.
They're doing ESG work, but this is the right kind of ESG work. This is God's ESG work.
They're doing. It's pure ESG. So I'm very excited.
This is the right kind of ESG, Matt.
Well, I'm very excited about it. But what Boyer cites...
Very woke, Boyer. Very woke.
So Jerry Boyer is on the advisory council of Viewpoint Diversity Score. So he's citing himself effectively, right? Like that's another thing that he's doing. But what they cite, or here's the quote they use, that the Viewpoint Diversity Score found that 62% of some of the largest companies in America, including Netflix, support nonprofits that are influencing public policy by actively attacking free speech and religious freedom. Okay?
Okay.
That was his finding.
Sure.
Netflix is not covered by the Viewpoint Diversity Score. It's not on the list.
Okay.
So they're saying that Netflix is doing this according to the Viewpoint Diversity Score, but the Viewpoint Diversity Score doesn't cover Netflix.
Confusing.
That took me 4 seconds to figure that out.
Yeah.
Right? But this is important because when you see these shareholder proposals, no one reads the footnotes. These are like long diatribes about somebody's agenda, whether it's a climate agenda or a social justice agenda, a human rights agenda, or a conservative religious agenda. And this is basically the same thing as anything else. The footnotes matter.
Yeah.
All I had to do was read it and find out that this thing was written with Jerry Boyer on the advisory council of it. So he's citing himself. They're citing wins that they had, but the wins are just themselves asking for things. In fact, in 2025, all mentions of the viewpoint diversity score are from Boyer Research shareholder proposals.
Yeah.
And they didn't cover the company that they're attacking in this proposal, but they're saying the viewpoint diversity score covered.
Yeah, I mean, this is why no one's looking at the anti-ESG proposal footnotes, because they're either citing themselves in this weird, very unacademic, self-referential way, or they're citing idiots on like X and Twitter, like Robbie Starbuck, who are just like trolls, or they're citing like gossip rags, like the New York Post or something. Like so that's why no one really looking into this.
The vast majority of the footnotes are exactly what you're talking about. They're links to Robbie Starbuck, like quotes in articles and Heritage Fund collateral.
Yeah,
but
they're not citing precedents. They're not citing law. They're not citing like any of that. They're not citing listing exchange requirements. None of that. Yeah.
Footnote number 2 actually mentions that Netflix uses a company called Benevity as part of their employee donation schemes, but the link of the footnote is to double the donation, which has no association. They have 2 different founders, 2 different companies, no association between the 2. I think they just got the link wrong. I'm not even sure, but it's totally separate companies.
It sounds like this is basically like veering. This is basically like veering towards conspiracy theory kind of nonsense rhetoric.
2 things are becoming obvious to us, and we talk about one here all the time. There's a good reason for proponent trust. The longer proponents keep filing and keep doing things and build a trust base with investors like John Chevedden and Jim McRitchie, the more likely it is they're well researched. They have proper citations. They actually are asking for things that investors like and investors trust them. The more you look at this type of thing, the more you realize you're not getting 1 or 2% because investors don't agree with you. As much of it has to do with you have the sloppiest version of what you're doing possible, right? It's both. But I also did a data dive.
Okay.
Because I couldn't help myself, because I spent way too long on this just to say vote no on it. The data dive is...
Which people are going to do already. They're going to do anyway, but go ahead.
But Netflix doesn't actually donate itself. They don't really have a foundation.
Not from a corporate
that they do
level,
donations.
you're saying.
Not the corporate level.
Yeah.
They have a couple of partnerships that are sort of adjacent, but they're very small money, very small things. The vast majority of their donations are employee donations. So when Boyer's asking for risks to the corporation of their donating, they fundamentally miss the fact that Netflix isn't doing the donating. The employees are.
Yeah, and of course the employees are in media in California, which suggests that we know what their political viewpoint's going to be. But that's the nature of media. I mean,
I didn't even want to speculate.
Arts. Yeah.
I pulled employee location data and I mapped it against most religious states based on Pew Research polling to figure out what percentage of Netflix employees are likely to think religion is, quote, very important in their lives, according to Pew Research. All right?
Yeah.
80% of Netflix headcount is in California, where less than half of the population views religion as very important to their lives.
Yeah.
Overall, across all states, I estimated that 4,900 of Netflix 10,400 employees are based in states where at least 50% of the population is religious. Like, we're talking about the majority of Netflix employees is not religious, is unlikely to be religious or consider it very important.
Yeah, you've just discovered something important about the arts, Matt.
And on top of that, the employees actually have the ability to donate to almost any 501c3 through the programs that they're offered. There's no evidence that they're not. So I've spent way too much time on this just to say vote no.
Wow.
But I do think it's important to because the vast majority of stewardship teams and investors we talk to, they spend very little time assessing the board. They ask the board a lot of questions about issues with the company. They don't assess the board members. They spend so much time on shareholder proposals. That's where ISS and Glass Lewis spend a lot of their time. Like almost everything is vote for the directors.
Despite their non-advisory nature.
And
I mean,
it describes
despite their non-binding nature, I should say. Yeah.
Exactly. It describes the disconnect you're seeing with say on pay, what can be a vote against, but every director who chose pay is a vote for. The investors themselves are not looking at directors and assessing them. They're looking at issues and assessing those. And the result is, I know investors are spending time reading these shareholder proposals and trying to figure out what to do. If you're going to spend the time, recognize that you can vote no on every single shareholder proposal and vote against directors, and you'll be much more impactful on behavior of the company, because these shareholder proposals, when you start reading the footnotes and actually diving into the data, they're largely, obviously and overtly agenda-driven proposals that have nothing to do with anything.
Anything else about Netflix?
Oh my God, no.
Thank God. That's the proxy countdown for the week of May 26th, 2025. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder shenanigans, dopey directors, scandalous CEO pay ratios, and wayward band-aids.